The next class of destroyers built by the U.S. was the 6 ships of the 1,000-ton Caldwell class. As opposed to the previous Sampsons, they dropped the raised forward deck and instead had one main deck that ran the length of the ship. This made them the first of the 3 consecutive classes that would eventually come to be known affectionately as the flush deck destroyers. This flush deck design gave these ships a relatively strong structural strength at the cost of the forward deck being closer to the waterline and thus more likely to be flooded at high speeds or in heavy waves. To help reduce this possibility, the deck lightly sloped upward, making it higher near the bow than at the rear, even though it was still the same deck. These were easily the best U.S. destroyers in service when it entered World War I. Unfortunately, their churning radius and endurance was still very poor for a destroyer. 4 of the 6 survived to fight in World War II. Caldwell was started December 6, 1916, entered service December 1, 1917, decommissioned June 27, 1922, and finally sold for scrap June 30, 1936. Craven was started November 20, 1917, and finished October 19, 1918. Gwyn was started June 21, 1917, completed March 18, 1920, decommissioned June 28, 1922, and finally sold for scrap March 16, 1939. Connor was started October 16, 1916, and completed January 12, 1918. Stockton was also started October 16, 1916, and completed November 26, 1917. Manley was started April 22, 1916, and completed October 15, 1917. All 4 survived the war and were quickly decommissioned. On February 7, 1939, Manley was converted into the Navy's first high-speed destroyer transport. On November 12, 1939, Craven was renamed Conway while in reserve to free up the name for the new Craven. On October 23, 1940, Conway, formerly Craven, Connor, and Stockton were transferred to the Royal Navy under Lend-Lease and were recommissioned as Lewis, Leeds, and Ludlow respectively. They were the first batch of the Town-class destroyer escorts, all renamed after towns with names in both the U.S. and England. They'll be described later. Main armament was originally the same as the Sampsons: 4 4-inch 50 caliber low-angle guns and 4 single open mounts, 1 on the bow, 1 on the stern, and 2 midship with 1 on either side. Secondary armament was originally 1 3-inch 37 caliber open-mounted midship anti-aircraft gun. They originally carried 12 torpedo tubes in 4 triple mounts, 2 on either side. All carried depth charges. As with most destroyers, there was no significant armor. Propulsion in these ships varied. Caldwell, Craven, Gwyn, and Manley had 4 boilers venting to 4 stacks, with only 3 stacks in Gwyn, that provided 20,000 horsepower to 2 shafts, driving the ships up to 35 knots. Connor and Stockton had 4 boilers venting to 3 stacks that provided 18,500 horsepower to 3 shafts, driving those ships to a relatively low 30 knots. On February 7, 1939, Manley finished being converted into the Navy's first high-speed destroyer transport, or APD. This involved removing all of her 4-inch guns and replacing them with 3 3-inch 50 caliber anti-aircraft guns, 1 forward, 1 aft, and 1 midship on the center line, where stacks 1 and 2 had been. Her forward 2 boilers and stacks were removed to make room for up to 200 Marines and their gear, cutting her speed from 35 to 20 knots. Finally, she exchanged her torpedo tubes for 4 32-foot landing craft. Manley was the only one of the 6 ships still in service with the U.S. Navy when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. She was in the Atlantic at the time. She transferred to the Pacific in mid-July 1942 and spent the rest of the war transporting Marine raiding parties and providing fire support, most notably during the Guadalcanal campaign. In late May 1945, she returned to the West Coast and became a training ship. She was decommissioned in November 1945 and sold for scrap a year later.